So CJ Stroud had a great situation. Bryce Young did not. My first question is coming from Kevin Donahue. That's at Biggs Donahue. What's the over-under of NFL teams moving on from their week one starter in 2025? And I thought this was a fascinating question because generally you might see less than a third of the league turnover. So I wanted to look at this and try to put a ceiling on it and say, what would be the absolute most? Now, you're not going to hit this number because there are lots of, I think, teams out there that you might include that you don't think are likely. Like the Dolphins, I mean, maybe, but that seems unlikely. The Seahawks seems unlikely. Like you can't completely rule it out, but those teams seem unlikely based on the contract the Dolphins gave Tua, based on the way that Geno Smith has played in Seattle. You just don't see those things as being very likely, but they are possible. So the over-under wouldn't be 15, but that would be where I would set the absolute ceiling after having gone through all 32 teams and marking off the Buffaloes of the world, the Cincinnatis, the Kansas Cities, the Baltimores, where you say there's absolutely no way, barring injury, that they're going to have a different quarterback in week one than they have right now. So I think the more realistic number right now is 6. And I've got 6 teams marked down right now as teams that I would say would probably be in that bucket of teams where you would say, okay, there's a good chance that they're turning over the position in 2025. One is the Steelers. That's obvious. Both guys are on 1-year deals. Justin Fields has played pretty well through 2 weeks. Is he going to hold on to the job? We have no idea what we're going to get from Russell Wilson when he comes back. He's still dealing with a calf injury. So there's a ton of uncertainty on where the Steelers are. They could draft one in the first round next year. I think all things are on the table for the Steelers. The Titans would be the second team. They are trying their best to get answers on Will Levis. It hasn't looked great through 2 weeks, but part of the reason why they loaded up the way that they did on the offensive side and signing Calvin Ridley, signing Lloyd Cushenberry, signing Tony Pollard, drafting J.C. Latham is, of course, to make the team better, but it's also so they can get a more clear picture of who Will Levis is one way or the other. Brian Callahan really liked the rookie tape that he saw on Will Levis. He wanted to give him a chance to be the quarterback of the future in Tennessee. There were a lot of high-end traits there to work with. He's going to give him the year, but I don't think anything's certain as far as where they're going to be at quarterback in 2025. The Raiders would be the third team. Again, Gardner Minshew's played well. I don't think anybody looks at that as more than a Band-Aid. If Gardner Minshew doesn't make it through the year as the starter, Aiden O'Connell, 4th-round pick from 2023, will get a shot. Do I think he's the long-term answer? Probably not. So the Raiders would be the third team on the list. The fourth team is the Giants. I mean, at this point, you wonder, is Daniel Jones going to make it to November as the starter? So I think there's a pretty high likelihood that they have another starter in 2025. The Vikings, number 5, might be the most interesting team in this list because Sam Darnold has played so well through 2 weeks. And certainly if he keeps playing this way, he's going to merit the idea that he could be the quarterback again in 2025. But they have J.J. McCarthy, who they spent a second round or a top 10 pick on in the draft. And so how does J.J. McCarthy look working in the background? Obviously, he's out for the year. Are they going to have a lot more information on J.J. McCarthy when they get to February and March and have to make this decision? Because remember, Sam Darnold is on a 1-year deal. The Vikings are in a very, very interesting spot because Sam Darnold is playing really, really well right now. And I think you're seeing the 3rd overall pick talent come out in Sam Darnold. He got the apprenticeship last year working under Brock Purdy and playing for Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. It seems like that work has paid off, as has his decision to go with Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings. He's playing great football. And he played great football at the end of the game last week, by the way, without Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, or TJ Hawkinson in the game and closing out the Niners. So very interesting quarterback situation going forward for the Vikings based on how they've been able to maximize just about everybody at that position who's come through there since Kevin O'Connell became the coach. And then finally, number 6, this is another interesting one, and that's the Panthers. We'll have more on Bryce Young in a minute, but I think the question becomes like, how do you balance the investment against how Bryce Young has performed? If Andy Dalton plays well, is there an opportunity to get Bryce Young back in there? Just like a lot of uncertainty for the Panthers at that position. So those would be the six teams I would look at: the Steelers, the Titans, the Raiders, the Giants, the Vikings, and the Panthers, as far as teams that could have different starters in week one of 2025, or at least have a high probability of having a new starter at quarterback in week one of 2025. Question number two is from Christian, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, De Guzman. That's at XTDGZ253. How much of Baltimore's 0-2 start can be accredited to the departure of Mike Macdonald? Christian, I think we have to be patient with Zach Orr. He is very well thought of. I think he's thought of in that organization as a future head coach, played linebacker in the league. And they picked him over a bunch of different guys and hiring him as their defensive coordinator. Remember, Denard Wilson went to Tennessee, he's doing a good job there. Anthony Weaver went to Miami to be the defensive coordinator. Certainly they could have at least made the call to Jesse Minter to see if they could have gotten him back. He coached in Baltimore before. Instead, he goes with John Harbaugh's brother Jim to the Chargers. So not only is Zach Orr really well thought of in that organization, they also picked him ahead of a bunch of other guys who are coordinators in other places to run the system that a lot of teams in the NFL are trying to get now, which is that Ravens system. So, I think you have to consider the decision making of John Harbaugh, which has generally been really good in elevating coaches. I think you also have to consider a lot of the moving parts that the Ravens have, not just on defense, but across their roster. You look on offense, three new offensive line starters: Kevin Zeitler, Morgan Moses, and John Simpson gone. You've got Roger Rosengarten, Daniel Falele, and Andrew Voorhees in. That's 60% of your offensive line. They think it'll be a good thing in the long run to have made those decisions, but in the short term, there have been some bumps. Patrick Queen is out. Again, they think Trenton Simpson can be an upgrade at linebacker, but that can take some time. They're working through some young corners, so there are a lot of moving parts in the roster. Do I think like having a new defensive coordinator after having one of the best defensive coordinators in the league over the last 2 years could be a factor? Sure. Let's also remember how Mike Macdonald started. In his second game as defensive coordinator, they got absolutely obliterated by Miami. They lost in a shootout, 42-38. The Dolphins had over 500 yards of offense at that time. And a lot of people were asking the same questions about Mike Macdonald. Why'd you move on from Wink Martindale to go to Mike Macdonald? Well, that wound up being a pretty good decision in the long run. I think you give this one patience. Again, maybe a factor in the 0-2 start, but there are a lot of factors in why the Ravens are 0-2 right now. Finally, question number three. This is from Bengals Mike. That's at Bengals Mike. Didn't they say Baker's career was pretty well over when he couldn't make it in Carolina either? He revived his career elsewhere, and elsewhere is waiting for Young. It's a fair point to make. Absolutely. I think, when you look across the league, you see the reclamation projects: Sam Darnold in Minnesota, Baker, like you said, in Tampa, Geno Smith in Seattle. I think there's a good lesson there. I think the lesson is that, a lot of times quarterbacks' performance can be dictated by their circumstances. And some quarterbacks go into great circumstances, other quarterbacks go into poor circumstances. I think, with the benefit of retrospect now, we can say that CJ Stroud went into a much better circumstance than Bryce Young did. I don't know if we would have said that at the time when the two were drafted and Bryce Young was going to play for Frank Reich, who was seen as a quarterback's whisperer, and CJ Stroud was going to go play for DeMeco Ryans, a first-year head coach who came from the defensive side. But as things turned out, they were able to get Nico Collins to a point where he became a star receiver, which he hadn't been previously. Tank Dell really worked out as a third-round pick. Dalton Schultz was a great pickup at tight end. They've got a really good offensive line to begin with. So CJ Stroud had a great situation. Bryce Young did not. Bryce Young went through his coach getting fired halfway through his rookie year. Bryce Young had moving parts in the offensive line. The offensive line didn't play well. A depleted receiver group that had just traded away DJ Moore, interestingly enough, in the trade to go get Bryce Young. So you have all of these moving parts, all of these different circumstances that are at play. And now, what you have is a quarterback who, quite frankly, to the teams that have played him, looks broken. A guy who's not looking downfield, a guy who doesn't see the field, the middle of the field very well. That could be related to his height. And, a guy who, and this is the death knell for quarterbacks, is looking at the rush. And, defensive coordinators right now see a guy who is being very careful about being hit. And that's a tough spot to be in as a quarterback. The guy with the quick eyes that processes so fast from Alabama is gone. And so when you look at a guy like that, there are two reasons why you'd pull him out. Number one, for his own good, because you don't want him losing more confidence if he's already lost confidence out there playing. And number two, as a first year head coach, you need a quarterback you can sell to the team. And right now, Bryce Young isn't that guy. So they'll sit him down, and it'll be interesting to see what happens, now going forward. If they have a high pick again, they may have a decision to make. If Andy Dalton plays well, they have the opportunity to get Bryce Young back in there. There are a lot of reasons why teams don't make this decision, why teams ride it out with their young quarterbacks. I can understand why the Panthers didn't. It becomes more complicated now that they've made the decision to sit him down. And this is not the end of Bryce Young's career, but it certainly complicates things. There are a lot of good stories of guys who got in better circumstances after being in bad circumstances earlier in their career. We'll see if that becomes Bryce Young. All right. So again, all your questions, you can get them to us next week on Tuesday on Twitter. If you want to send videos, that's great. You can send them to email to breer@gmail.com, or again, just answer the call for questions that I put out every Tuesday on Twitter. We'll be back here with the mailbag next week, and we'll be back at you Friday with the Breer Report. We'll see you guys then.